Hello. Today I am going to read my story, Entry of the Gladiators, from Circus of the Dead by Wicked Shadow Press, of which I am the editor. This story, Entry of the Gladiators, was actually the inspiration for the entire collection. I had an idea. I talked to the publisher about it, and they're like, "That sounds great. Would you like to edit a whole anthology of circus horror?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds great." But it was a really great experience. I learned a lot, and I'm very, very proud of the book that we put together. So here is Entry of the Gladiators from Circus of the Dead. The smell of blood and sawdust filled his nostrils as he smeared the slick white grease paint across his haggard face. His rough hands were covered in cuts and calluses, and the ghost of the missing finger on his left hand still ached when he flexed it. The screams had stopped some time earlier, but he knew there would be more coming. As he began painting the bright blue diamonds around his eyes, he focused on making sure those screams would not be his. He didn't know how long he had been there or why. Didn't remember his name or what the world had been like before all of this. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered now but the ring, the performance, the crowd, the blood. He carefully traced the brush around his lips with a bright, garish red, and then finished his war paint with a carefully drawn red heart on his right cheek. A jagged line of black split the heart in two, a broken heart for a broken man. If he was even still a man. He imagined that his humanity had fled him long ago, along with hope. Neither lasted long in this cursed place. Staring in the mirror at the bright paint that covered his sunken cheeks and the shock of bright green hair that topped his head, he grinned his biggest, most intimidating smile, baring his crooked yellow teeth. Two were missing, recent injuries from the center ring. Was he slowing down? Losing his edge? He had survived so many of these performances, been bathed in the hot blood and fetid ichor of victory more times than he could count, but everyone's luck had to run out at some point. He opened the battered wooden wardrobe that leaned against the tent wall and chose his armor for the evening's event. An oversized jumpsuit with a red and black harlequin diamond pattern on the right arm and left leg, with large red puffs down the front seam. His signature broken heart sigil was emblazoned across the chest, right above his own heart. He felt the stained and threadbare fabric of the jumpsuit as he removed it from its hanger, draping it across his arms with a dark reverence. He slowly donned the garment, feeling the sense of power it conveyed as he completed the ritual and fastened the last straps. He heard a beast roar from somewhere far off, the deep leonine roar of one of the great cats that he sometimes had to fight, with their massive fangs and claws like curved swords. You remember the first time he had faced one in the ring, the icy fear that gripped him as it stalked him across the dirt, the shouts of the crowd driving it forward. He couldn't have imagined a more terrifying sight back then, but he had been so naive, hadn't he? There were worse horrors he had faced since then. Such horrors. Finally, he sat and donned the red and black shoes that he had worn since his first performance. Long and wide and scuffed from use, their laces replaced half a dozen times at least. But they were part of his armor, part of his ritual. He tied each shoe with double knots and stood, staring into the distorted mirror that leaned against the wall near the entrance to the big top, with the curved glass that showed him as shorter and wider than he really was. He flexed his shoulders and his knees, feeling the weight of his mission, his duty, and he breathed a heavy sigh. He heard the music start, the sharp, distorted notes of an ancient calliope piping out entry of the gladiators to the cheers of the yet unseen crowd beyond. It was time. He walked solemnly to the entrance and paused for a moment before picking up 3 wooden clubs, their white and red paint chipped and stained from use. He hefted them, feeling their weight, and gave them a preliminary toss, crossing from one hand to the next, juggling them in a long, practiced motion. He knew the crowds loved the clubs, and even though they were less effective weapons than the hammer or even the knives, he knew he could still employ them efficiently in the center ring and get the audience on his side, get them cheering for him when the blood started to flow. He knew that could make all the difference in a close battle. He strode into the big top to the crescendo of the entrance music and held his clubs high. There were cheers and boos from the wretched, glassy-eyed crowd, as there always was when the clowns appeared. They sat there in the bleachers, squat and misshapen in the dim, unnatural light of the big top, the stained red and white stripes of the tent walls climbing high above them all, with heavy poles made of onyx black wood holding it all up. Black-robed figures were spreading more sawdust and raking out the rings in front of him, then hurrying off into the shadows before the next act began. 2 other clowns joined Broken Heart for this performance, a veteran he had fought alongside before, with a round red nose and bright red hair jutting out from either side of his head, and a new face with round, black eye paint and a jagged mouth design meant to look frightening. The clowns who tried to use their war paint for intimidation never lasted long, and Broken Heart shook his head in disappointment. This new clown probably wouldn't survive the battle they were about to face. The ringmaster shambled into the spotlight of the center ring, its long limbs misshapen and its body pulsating sickly as it moved. It hissed and shrieked to the crowd, a language unintelligible to the clowns, but he understood the meaning all too well. They were there to fight and to die, to spill blood and brains and guts across the 3 rings under the cursed big top tent, for the amusement of the crowd and the things that lurked in the shadows, the dark gods of whatever hell they currently inhabited, beings that had driven clowns mad just by glancing at them. The ringmaster finished his speech, and the crowd cheered and hissed, and then it was time. Broken Heart marched purposely into the center ring with the other clowns, the blue-white spotlights almost blinding, and raised his clubs high. There were scattered cheers as he juggled the 3 objects expertly, then caught them and bowed deeply. The other veteran, Red Nose, had a hammer and flourished it with an impressive spin. The new clown had chosen knives, another rookie mistake that all 3 of them would probably end up paying for. At the sound of the cannon, Broken Heart was ready, his body tense and waiting for whatever was being unleashed at them. His blood froze as he saw the thing loping through the far entrance, elephantine in size, a great reptilian thing with rippling muscles under purple-red scales and wicked hooked tusks, as long as a clown was tall. He knew from experience that its fangs dripped with a venom that would paralyze as it set every nerve on fire. He had seen clowns die in unspeakable agony after a mere scratch. Red Nose nodded at him, and he nodded back in response. They had their own language, the clowns, and he understood the strategy immediately. He did a triple tumble to the left with a series of high bouncing somersaults to get the beast's attention, and then began to juggle, flashing his biggest, toothiest grin as he tossed the clubs in high, slow arcs and caught each one expertly. The beast watched him and began slowly stalking him, as he could see its lamp-like eyes fixated on his movements. He heard the murmur of the crowd build to a cheer as the beast got closer, But just before it reached the center ring, it hissed and snarled and turned lightning fast. The new clown had crept up to flank it, but didn't realize his knives would have little effect on the thick, scaly hide. The creature batted him away with a rear claw, opening an angry red gash across the clown's belly and spilling a loop of intestine into the sawdust. The new clown shrieked in agony and tried to back away from the approaching predator, giving Red Nose the opportunity he was waiting for to strike. Where blades were not an effective weapon against the reptilian beasts, bludgeoning weapons had an advantage, and Red Nose took it, swinging fast and hard against the beast's hip and apparently knocking its leg out of its socket, based on the shriek from the creature and the way its hind leg crumpled beneath it. It spun around to face its new attacker, but Red Nose was ready for that and somersaulted away as the beast was slowed by its injury. The crowd responded with a guttural cheer. Brokenheart knew it was his turn then, though the creature was twice as dangerous in its rage now that it was injured. He tumbled left and right, hopping to and fro to confuse the monster and make it angrier, getting it to lash out, to do something he could take advantage of. The beast lunged and the clown rolled to his left and fired off one of his clubs, thrown with deadly accuracy and hitting the beast just behind its huge, slitted eye. He missed the eye, but hit hard enough to daze the beast and cause it to rear back unsteadily on its hind legs, lashing out wildly with long, black claws. Suddenly, the injured clown appeared, holding his guts in with one arm and slashing the soft belly of the beast viciously with one of his hooked blades, digging in deep and drawing out a long line of thick, green-black blood that dripped wet across the sawdust of the ring. The beast bellowed and stomped down with both front feet, crushing the rookie clown with a roar. The two remaining clowns had lost an ally, but the creature was staggered and bleeding badly. In death, the new clown may have given him the advantage they needed. The audience cheered wildly as the beast continued to trample their fellow clown, now little more than a gory stain on the floor of the center ring. But Red Nose took advantage of the distraction and slammed his hammer into the same injured hip, causing the beast's rear leg to buckle and go limp beneath it. Not giving the creature time to recover, Brokenheart hurled all three of his heavy clubs at its head, the second one hitting with a crunch that sounded like breaking skullbone over the crowd's demented cheers, and the third club popping the beast's eye from its socket so the fluid-filled orb dangled on the side of its face, still connected by a thick, wet optical nerve. The crowd was in a frenzy at this point as he darted into the creature's shadow to reclaim his clubs with a flourish. He misjudged his position, however, and the creature flailed its head, lashing out with its tusks, raking towards him with fearsome speed. He dodged away at the last second, avoiding the razor-sharp ends, and the pale, round curve of the right tusk caught him in the chest, tossing him 12 feet and cracking at least 2 of his ribs. He could taste blood as he staggered to his feet, sidestepping cautiously away. The scaly beast was staggered, partially blinded, and bleeding heavily from its abdomen, but it was still a deadly foe, and the clown knew it. They had to get in close for a solid kill, but the way the thing was lunging at any kind of movement made it unpredictable and extremely dangerous, and the roaring and shrieking of the crowd was driving it into a frenzy of violence and anger. It was the end game, and Brokenheart knew it could go badly at any moment. The beast threw itself at Red Nose, and Brokenheart suddenly saw a glint of metal on the floor of the ring. The dagger from the new clown was laying there, stomped into the sawdust and stained with the blood and gore of its former owner. As Red Nose got the beast's attention with a series of cartwheels, Brokenheart dove into the center ring and retrieved the knife, leaving his clubs behind, and then flanked around the creature to the rear quarter and its lame rear leg, now dragging useless and spasming randomly. Brokenheart knew the timing had to be perfect, or he would be crushed or maimed under his foe. He waited for Red Nose to dodge out of the way of its front claws and slam his hammer into the side of the beast's head before he darted underneath the monster and plunged the hooked blade into the soft hollows of its right front armpit and pulled down and hard to the left, dragging the blade across ribs and into its abdomen. As he expected, the monster again attempted to rear up to retaliate against the pain, but its lame back leg caused it to fumble its attack, letting Brokenheart open its belly wide and spill hot, black blood and organs all over him, drenching him as he rolled out from under the beast. The beast collapsed to its side and roared a final shriek before Red Nose slammed his giant green and purple hammer into its skull, smashing it into the dirt and sawdust of the ring and killing the beast, which quivered with a final spasm and lay limp, a growing pool of ichor spreading out around it. Red Nose raised his hammer high, and Brokenheart took a deep bow, still covered in sticky black blood and brandishing the dagger. The crowd went wild with shrieks and screams and infernal drumming as the ringmaster again skittered into the big top and raised both of its misshapen hands over its head and, as far as Brokenheart could tell, declared them victorious. Not that it mattered. He and Red Nose both took a final bow and walked solemnly back to their dressing rooms. Brokenheart once again sat in front of his mirror, blood and gore streaking his face paint and obscuring the red heart painted on his cheek. He sighed, wiped the mess with a dirty rag, picked up his paintbrush, and began his ritual again.